That'll make like the blooper reel or something. All right, so market equilibrium, we're bringing supply and demand together. And this is one of the truly amazing things, right? You should know by this point that buyers, the demand side of the market wants to save money, the producer side of the market wants to make money. How is it that these two groups come together hundreds, millions, of times a day with no real conflict, right? We're able to work this out. So that's what this PowerPoint and lecture is about. Okay, so let's look at what this looks like here. So we have, all we're doing is combining a supply schedule and a demand schedule. So you can see on the left side, you have the demand schedule side of it, and the supply schedule side of it's on the right. So there's our demand curve, downward sloping, that illustrates the law of demand, right? Higher prices, lower quantity demanded. And then you have your supply curve illustrating the law of supply. The upward slope talks about the direct relationship between quantity supplied and price. And right where they meet in the middle, this is the market equilibrium. This is where the market is happy, okay? Where supply and demand meet each other. So in this market, at a price of $3, everybody that wants a soda can buy one because there's enough people willing to supply a soda, okay? Now, we know the market doesn't stay like this. We know that there are shifts in the supply and demand curve, right? And there are times when the market's not in equilibrium, right? So the two specialized situations we're going to talk about first are shortages and surpluses, okay? So if you look at $5, at a price of $5, nobody wants it. Only 50 people want to buy a soda, but suppliers are more than happy to sell 250 sodas a week, right? This is going to result in a surplus of 200 sodas. Now, you can think to yourself, right? This is not anything the government needs to get involved in. I'm going to explain it, but as I go through it, I want you to think about it on your own, right? How do we discourage people from wanting to sell it, and how do we encourage people to want to buy it, right? Think about that, because that's all that happens in the marketplace, right? At a price of $4, only 100 people want it, yet 200 people are willing to supply it. So we have a surplus of 100. At a price of $3, we're at equilibrium, and then as the price gets lower, we have more people that want to buy it than are willing to sell it, and that's called a shortage. And at a price of $1, we have a shortage of 200. Okay, so let's take a look at what this looks like on a graph. And again, the graphs are really important because that's where everything there's a thing they say in economics that a graph, like a picture is worth 1,000 words, a graph is worth 1,000 words, right? Your graphs will tell you so much. Okay, so here we're looking, you see on the y-axis, the vertical axis, price, and along the horizontal axis, the x-axis, you have the quantity, bushels of corn. Okay, so we have our prices and quantities there, and we're plotting these points. There's your demand curve. We have our supply schedule over here, and we have our supply curve. We're plotting the points, and there's our supply curve. So you can see market equilibrium is at a price of $3 and 7,000 bushels of corn, okay? But now let's look at some specialized scenarios like the ones we just looked at, right? So there's your equilibrium. What happens, and there's your equilibrium price of $3. What happens when the price is $4, right? If you notice, at a price of $4, we have not that many people wanting to buy it. Only 4,000 bushels are demanded, yet 10,000 bushels are supplied. How do we get rid of that surplus? How do we get more people to want to buy it and less people to want to sell it? Well, what happens naturally is we start to lower the price. And I always tell my students, think about that equilibrium price as like a vortex or a whirlpool. Everything gets sucked into that equilibrium. And so as the price starts to come down, right, you'll notice the quantity demanded will start to increase, the quantity supplied will start to decrease until we hit that equilibrium, right? And we'll eliminate that surplus. So a surplus is excess supply, and the way to eliminate it is lower the price. that discourages production, it encourages consumption, and we'll get to our equilibrium. And then, of course, we have the opposite. We have a shortage, right? At a price of $2, we have 11,000 people that want to buy it, only 4,000 people willing to produce it. So how do we get rid of that? What does the market tell people? It says, look, if you start growing corn, there's some people that will buy it. And so as you start to raise the market price, you have more people willing to produce it. Now, as the price goes up, less people are willing to consume it, and you reach that market equilibrium, okay? And so a shortage is excess demand, and the way to get rid of that excess demand is to raise the prices. And again, this should be intuitive to you if you just understand the law of supply and the law of demand. Before I go on, are there any questions about what I've done so far? Okay, so let's look at what happens when the curves shift. Because we know there are a number of things that shift the demand curve, and there are a number of things that shift the supply curve. So here we have an equilibrium. It doesn't really matter what the numbers are at this point. We just look at general trends. So an increase in demand shifts the demand curve to the right, and it raises the equilibrium price, and it raises the equilibrium quantity. Okay? This graph is missing its label on the x-axis, but other than that, the graph looks perfect. That's what you want to graph out when you graph your shifts. And remember, the important thing here is being comfortable with these shifts, because we're going to be doing this a lot. Not necessarily with supply and demand, but with aggregate demand and aggregate supply and the money supply and the loanable funds demand and all of these other ones. And let's look at a decrease in demand. There's our equilibrium. Okay, we have a decrease in demand. Demand curve shifts to the left. Now, where the demand curve intersects the supply curve right here, we have a new equilibrium. The price is going down and the quantity is going down. Okay, so that's increases and decreases in demand. And again, the arrows are really helpful. There should be labels here too. This should be initial price, and this should be P1. This should be initial price, and this should be P1. That should be Q, and that should be Q1. So just make sure that when you practice this, you'll start to do that. And then let's look at changes in supply. All right, so there's our initial market equilibrium. We have an increase in supply, right? Supply moves to the right. That's going to decrease price and increase quantity. Again, you should have P1, P, Q, Q1, okay? Or in this case, all your labels should be the same. So it would be P1, P1, Q1, P2, Q2, because that coincides with S2. Again, this is why we practice it. As you draw it out, you become more comfortable doing it. And then finally, you have a decrease in supply. There's our initial equilibrium. A decrease in supply is going to shift to the left, right? Be careful when you shift to the supply curve, you don't say up or down, right? Because that's a decrease in supply here, but it looks like it's going up. So when you talk about it, try to think about it in terms of increase and decrease, not up or down. That's down, but it's actually an increase, right? So when you have a decrease in supply, price goes up and quantity goes down. And again, this should be intuitive, right? Let's look at something, pick something that's limited in supply. When there's not a lot of it, what happens? It gets more expensive and there's not that much of it. So again, all of this stuff, the class is hard, but you don't need to make it harder. Use your intuition, use what you know to be true, and you should be fine. Okay? Now, there's one more thing that I want to show you here. Okay? And this is, I'm going to keep it recording just in case, and I'm going to share my screen with you. Double shifts, right? We know that both curves can shift. I'm going to show you the easy way to do this. Okay, cancel, share screen. Start broadcast. So stop share. Okay, so you guys have seen this before. No. So let's look at a double shift. If you were to draw a double shift on your graph, right? I'm just going to draw it really quickly. If you do demand increases and supply decreases, it looks like a chaotic mess. So if you get a double shift, this is the way to do it, okay? So I'm going to draw a curve here. I'm going to draw a curve here. We have our demand curve, our supply curve, our equilibrium price, our equilibrium quantity, price, and quantity. We have price, quantity, demand curve, supply curve, equilibrium quantity, equilibrium price. And then I'm going to do a little thing right here, supply, demand. I got left-hander syndrome where my hand's off the iPad, so I'm all wonky drawing. And I got price, and I got quantity. So let me give you a scenario. Sushi becomes really popular. Everybody loves to eat tuna sushi, but the oceans are being overfished. Okay? So let's look at the first one. Sushi is becoming really popular. That affects the demand curve. Demand is going to increase for sushi. Everybody wants it. So we shift the demand curve to the right. Draw your new equilibriums. So when the demand curve shifts, price goes up and quantity goes up. Now let's look what happens with supply. What did I say? Tuna is being overfished in the ocean. So the supply of tuna is going to go down. That's going to shift to the left. It's going to decrease. New supply curve, new equilibrium, new quantity. What happens when the supply curve shifts? Price goes up, quantity goes down. So when you have a double shift, and they say, what's going to happen to price or what's going to happen to quantity? We can say for sure that price is going to go up because in both scenarios, price goes up. But quantity, because they go in opposite directions, is going to be indeterminate. And another little helpful hint, kind of a shortcut. If there is a double shift, if both curves are shifting, one of the variables, price or quantity, will always be indeterminate. Okay? So to me, it's much easier when you get double shifters to do them individually and set up a little thing like this rather than try to sketch it out because your graphs become a mess.